This short video is looking at the Dryden poem, I Feed a Flame Within Me. Now, if you don't already know this poem, just take a moment to read it for yourself, because we're going to work through this as an unseen poem. So not only are we going to be looking at the method by which you can approach an unseen poem, but also we're going to be looking at decoding a little bit of that slightly older, more archaic language. So this is a poem that's got not only some of the old tis and though and thee in it, but also some of the syntax and some of the meanings are drawing on slightly older traditions, and they sometimes take a little bit of understanding. So make sure you've read the poem and that you're looking at trying to work out who you think is speaking, what you think they're talking about, and generally trying to pick up the story of the poem. Now, normally I would ask you to look at the title of the poem and see what connotations or what expectations that is establishing before you start to think of the story. Now, here, as with so many older poems, actually the title is the first line. So we kind of get slightly less from that. We go straight into our first line. And here you can see that the website I've taken it from has actually capitalised I feed as just a tradition at the start. That's not something that you would comment on, shouting feed. That's just a tradition of the time. Okay, so looking at our first stanza then, we have the idea, I feed a flame within which so torments me that it both pains my heart and yet contents me. Now, I've read that as one clause because we've got the enjambment on the first line. So really, to get the proper sense of it, we have to keep on reading. So straight away, we go through the idea that I feed. So we've got our first person speaker. Now, interpretation of this is open to you. Some people argue that Dryden is writing as a female character. He might be writing as a male character. Does it matter? How does it influence your interpretation? But here we've certainly got a person who is talking about feeding a flame. And straight away we think, well, this is actually more likely to be a metaphor, metaphorical, than actually talking about looking at a fire. Because we've already read the poem through and we work out that the story of this really is our speaker saying that he or she is in love with somebody, but they're going to keep their love a secret, because that way they don't risk being further hurt by rejection. So we start with that metaphorical, I feed a flame. And the minute we get a metaphor, and especially a well-known metaphor like fire equals passion or love, drill down into that metaphor and ask yourself why that really fits. Okay, this is a traditional kind of image for love or passion, the idea of a flame or fire. What do the two have in common? And you start to think of things like heat, burning, probably consuming, kind of eating you up, maybe uncontrollable. Okay? And this person is actually not just being burned up. They are feeding this. Okay, so in the same way that you feed an actual literal fire by putting wood or fuel or coal on it, then here we are kind of keeping this emotion going. So this person, we know, doesn't want the flame of their love to go out. They are nurturing it. They are looking after it within this metaphor. Which is why it's slightly surprising that later on in the line, we learn that it torments me. So here we've got a negative word of kind of pain and suffering. And our speaker says it both pains my heart and yet contents me. So this fire, this flame, is paradoxical. Okay, so we say something is a paradox when it's something that when we look at the first time we see it, it doesn't seem to make sense. And then when we unpick it, it does make sense. So you've got that contradiction in there, that it causes both pain and injury and yet makes him happy, or makes the speaker happy. And straight away I also start to notice that we've got repetition of me and me. And actually with this first person, we've also got quite a few I's there. So if we're looking at the focus here is on the speaker and their feelings and their emotions as shown by the repetition of the personal pronouns. And personal pronouns are another quite a good way of getting into an unseen poem, because you're looking at who's speaking, what do they think of themselves, who are they speaking to, what do they think of that person. If you get repetition of the speaker, what's that saying? If you get repetition of you or him or they or us or we, what's that saying? So here we've got me rhyming with me in that couplet. So it really is focusing on the speaker. Then kind of notice that when we go back to the, or we move on to our third line, 'tis such a pleasing smart, and I so love it, that I had rather die than once remove it. And if we're still thinking about rhyme, or we're still thinking about repetition and rhyme, here we've got it and it rhymed. So far, I know these are kind of repeated rhymes, if you like. The poet is using that end rhyme to rhyme with itself. But the focus is now on the speaker and on the love. So this is now going to be a very kind of focused poem on those two ideas. And this development of the paradox kind of carries on with this oxymoronic sense. And remember that oxymoron is where you have these phrases where the elements of it seem to be competing, seem to be contradicting each other. A really famous example in Romeo and Juliet, loving hate, hot, ice, cold, fire. You really kind of realise that the writer has thought quite hard about these contradictions in order to give you a bigger impression of the feeling and emotion. So here we've also got a couple of things that we might not be familiar with. This to start off with, tis. Whenever you see tis in writing, then you know it's going to be short for it is. Okay, so this apostrophe here means that I has been mixed out and then it's squished together. Okay, so if you see tis, read it is. So tis such a pleasing smart. Now, we know smart today as being clever, as being intelligent, but there's a secondary meaning to it where something stings if you get hit. Okay, so imagine flicking an elastic band against your skin maybe, and that kind of ow feeling is a smart, right? It's that kind of stinging, tingling of the skin when it's been kind of whacked by something. And our poet or our speaker is saying, this is a pleasing smart. It's a satisfying pain. And I so love it that I'd rather die than once remove it. Okay, so he doesn't want to, or she doesn't want to lose this pain. There's something about this emotional torment that is keeping them going. And that's the end of our first quatrain. Most of it is end stopped. So you can see these things here. And there's our caesura there. So you might want to consider, caesura there as well, what these pauses mean. Okay, here it said the enjambment running on to the effect, the torment carries on going to the next line. Here we've got end stop, end stop, end stop. This is kind of quite a measured, considered maybe view of this pain. This isn't an emotional reaction to it. We're going to get the impression that this speaker has thought through what they're going to do, and that is maybe reflected in the end stops in the caesura, giving us time for pause and reflection. So next quatrain being a 4-line stanza. And we change focus slightly. It says, yet he for whom I grieve shall never know it. Okay, that modal verb shall. Okay, there is a certainty there. There is a decision that's been made. Also got this idea of it and it again. This speaker really can't escape the effect of their love. So yet he for whom I grieve shall never know it. My tongue does not betray, nor my eyes show it. And again, the old-fashioned spelling, if you are feeling thrown by that, try and voice the poem in your head, right? And then you realise that when you read it, "Nor my eyes show it," you realise, okay, it's show. You know, it that fits with the meaning. And it's almost as if this speaker is now looking at their different body parts and kind of willing those parts to come together to defend the whole. So, you know, your tongue has got to be on guard not to betray you. Your eyes have got to be on guard not to show it. So what's the effect of love on them? You know, well, it's maybe kind of breaking them up a little bit inside or in their own perception of their self. Not a sigh, not a tear, my pain discloses. So the pain is like a separate entity, but he or she is keeping their sighs and tears in. Discloses to reveal. And then we're talking about the tears here for the they. And another comment that if you're having difficulty working out what's going on in an unseen poem, really do try and work out which each of the pronouns is referring to. So here it's the tears falling silently, like dew on roses. And we've got this beautiful natural image. Okay. I'd also say that, you know, the dew appears at the start of the day. It's that grass, the grass being wet in the morning when it hasn't rained. That's dew on the grass. Okay, so it's almost like the tears maybe refresh themselves every day, if they are just like the dew on roses. So he or she can't escape their pain and they're quietly crying. Then again, we get another shift. We get almost a kind of resolution or answer of what they're going to do. Thus, if you think of thus as therefore, okay, so thus to prevent my love from being cruel, my heart's the sacrifice as it is, as 'tis the fuel. Okay, so here we suddenly switch to the person who's being loved, okay, and the speaker fears that they are going to be cruel to them, that basically they're going to reject them. That's the cruelest thing you can do to somebody who loves you, is to not want anything to do with them. So this speaker decides that they are not going to take the chance. And if you look at where this decision is, it's kind of almost at the centre of the poem, isn't it? You know, this is the kind of decision that they've come to. I'm not going to tell them, I'm not going to let them go. Let them know, rather, that way I don't get hurt. So to prevent my love from being cruel, my heart's the sacrifice, as 'tis the fuel. So we realise that this feeding of the flame, it's still the heart, and the speaker is giving up their heart in order to keep that love going. It becomes the fuel to feed the fire of the metaphorical love. And maybe there is that kind of hint of sadness that fuel will be consumed. Okay, it might be that actually, you know, maybe this can't last forever. Maybe this love, you know, how long is the heart going to burn for before it's burned out, almost? And while I suffer thus, while I suffer like this, therefore, to give him quiet. So protecting this person from the knowledge that the speaker's in love with them is going to allow them a kind of happiness, maybe, you know, at best quietness, maybe happiness. And my faith rewards my love, though he deny it, and the it is my love. So the speaker knows that by having faith, so that belief, they will get their reward about their love, even though the loved one is not going to acknowledge, is not going to admit it. And we're back to this it again, you know, the focus on the love. And therefore we have to see, what's our speaker going to do? Well, on his eyes will I gaze, and there delight me. So it's going to be looking. If you gaze, you're kind of looking peacefully, wonderingly, maybe adoringly. And there's that determination. You know, we had shall up here, there's this modal verb here. On his eyes will I gaze. So they've decided, I'm just going to look at his eyes and take my delight from that. And where I conceal my love, no frown can fright me. This is one of those old-fashioned expressions again. It means that, you know, if I hide my love, I cannot be upset by or kind of unnerved by anybody frowning at me. So nobody can get me if I don't reveal that I'm in love, right? More particularly, I guess, it would be the look that would be the frown from the lover's eyes. So our speaker wants just to be left alone to watch, rather than for the lover to realise, or the loved one to realise, and all of a sudden those eyes turn into a frown. And finally, this little couplet is kind of picking up on, again, the idea that we've got me here. So the focus comes back to, well, what am I going to do? Well, to be more happy, I dare not aspire. Aspiration, aspire means hope. Okay, so, or to try and aim for something. Your aspirations are your hopes and your dreams. And the speaker says, well, I don't dare to hope to be more happy than this. The best I'm going to get is to be allowed to look at his eyes. And the other kind of option is, if I don't try and do anything else, if I don't mount any higher, I can't fall even lower than I am. So basically, if I don't take the risk, I'm not going to kind of be hurt. So this poem is quite sad, really, in its conclusion, that the speaker concludes that there's nothing they can do apart from love from afar and keep their love a secret, whilst maybe being consumed by it, eaten up by it. But this is a sacrifice that they are willing to make, just because they really do value the loved one and the feeling of being in love. So hopefully this has given you a little bit of insight into the poem. If you were writing this up, if you were saying, how does Dryden use language effectively, or language form and structure in this poem effectively, then you'd aim to get a balance between looking at the techniques, so things like the central metaphor. This is an extended metaphor. It runs throughout the poem. Love is fire. You might talk about the repetition. You might talk about the use of the personal pronouns. You might talk about the use of the modal verbs. Then you'd move to form and structure and look at that rhyme, look at the repetition of those end rhymes, look at the idea of the different focuses of the quatrains, comment on enjambment, comment on end stopping. Now, one thing we haven't said is meter. Just doing a quick kind of check on this. Thus to prevent my love from being cruel, my heart's a sacrifice and this is fuel. I think there's a good chance it's iambic. It's probably a regular iambic pentameter. But again, that rhythm may be the thing that is driving the speaker, that heartbeat, that idea of kind of not being able to get away from that emotion. I hope this helps, and good luck with your work.